toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. Well, welcome everyone. This is the 7th in the series of becoming a human divine being. And today we're going to be doing a little exploring of the Barzakh, the interface meeting place. But to start with, I want to talk about one of the divine names, which initially when I saw it, my thought was, well, why would I want to work with this? Or why would anyone want to invoke this quality? And it's Qabid, Q-A-B-I-D, which means the divine constriction. And we probably don't have real great associations with the term constriction, but I'd like to explain what it, I think that it really means. So, Pir Vilayat says that our being is like a inverted cone. It's infinite at the top, but finite and converges into our physical form at this side of things. And if it weren't for the limitation that exists in manifestation, then the divine purpose couldn't be fulfilled. Because if you recall, the creation began, it said, because God was a hidden treasure, desiring to be known, to love, to be loved, and so on. And the only way that could happen is if there was a creation that took place, which is a limitation of the infinite into the finite. It's the spirit becomes into matter, light becomes into matter. So this relationship can be established that we've been talking about for quite some time, those of you who have been in the 2 previous series and now the current series. So let's think about constriction as only being a limitation if we are identified solely with our personal vantage point. In other words, we believe that all that we are is this body, our experiences in this physical world, the input from the senses, our thoughts in response to what we're experiencing, our emotions in response to what we're experiencing. And that kind of constriction is a limitation that is not adaptive in the process of our spiritual awakening, because the price we pay for that is the feeling of separation from what we're really longing for. And Rabbani Ra is going to be talking in a bit about ishq, that nostalgia, that deep desire that is an important part of this whole divine creative process. But if we think of constriction in the way that if you're looking under a microscope, until you get into focus, well, all the information from what you're trying to look at is coming up through the eyepiece, but you can't make any use out of it because it's not in focus. You haven't narrowed down the way the light comes through, so you have a crystal clear image of what you're trying to experience. And the same would be true if you were looking through a telescope where you could adjust the focus, or even a pair of binoculars. And if you're familiar with lasers, what lasers do is they converge frequencies of light, so there's just a pure vibration that's used for all kinds of things. It can be used for healing, for exploration, and so on. So the kind of constriction that is adaptive is one that enables a coherence of our being that we can bring to the Barzakh, the interface, the meeting place. And you may recall some time ago, I talked about something called Bekenstein's bound, and he showed that whenever you have an interface between any 2 things, and you can think of the screen that you're watching this class on as an interface, there's a limitation in both directions about how much information can come through, and it's directly related to the surface area of the screen. So I think we can apply that to our relationship in becoming a human divine being. The more of ourself that has awakened and we've obtained access to, that we bring to the Barzakh, to the interface, to the meeting place, then the more that we can return to the divine, so the divine can know of itself through us, but the more that we can receive on our end from the divine.
So that's a very good lead in to speaking about one of the elements of the Barzakh we've discussed, and it's the wise one's mirror. We discussed that this is like a tool that can be used as part of our imaginal faculty in order to bring an element of the world of the senses into closer contact with the different realms of being. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it right now. I really feel that this idea of multidimensionality that we brought up many times might need a little more explaining. And I'm hoping that tonight will be a good time for that. So I'm glad that you mentioned the Bekenstein bound, and we need a large surface area in order to do great and grand works of unifying realms, of communicating with realms, of even bringing in others to communicate with those realms, all kinds of cross currents and possibilities. And so one means of doing that is this it really was called wise man's mirror. So we made a little adjustment here. Wise one's mirror perhaps can be worked with our imaginal faculty. I really felt that if it were three-dimensional or even more, usually you think of the mirror surface as a plane, and it has no other dimensions to it, the 2 dimensions, that's it. But if it really became much more porous and much greater, it really could hold much more. And it would have many more possibilities for connection. And even you could think of your own mirror as distinct from any other mirror. It would have your own unique kinds of surfaces. But it really could have much more dimensionality, much more depth to it. So why would you want something like that? Well, because if you were, we spoke before of the realms, and it was a little confusing. Some people felt like we're going away from where we are. Why are we going up to this angelic realm or the realm of archetypes way up here? We've got enough to do in this world. Well, yes, and what we like to do is do integration of the realms here. A way to hold the world of the senses, and at the same time then open that to the other realms. That's one of the things that we can as humans do, is become the bridge. It's really something that we're looked to by many other kingdoms and beings, that we can be in this. We say we're in this, although really it's our image from the imaginal realm that's projected into this sensory realm. But however we are the outposts of being able to do this work. So idea of a mirror that is three-dimensional, you could think of it that way, even though it's many-dimensional. It's kind of hard to think of it like that, and it doesn't really matter. When we're working with an image, it can stand for something that is way more than that. Reflect back to Jesus speaking of the lambs, speaking of the shepherds in the field, and, very simple imagery, but it can hold so much more. So I think this mirror idea can hold way more. So why don't we work with this for a few minutes and feel that kind of construct, which can be, again, think of the patterning that makes sense to you, that feels like you're patterning, however that might be. But give some depth to the mirror so that we can really kind of reflect one realm with another, perhaps. We can reflect a being with other beings, or maybe the angelic realm with a friend that is ill. I have done this many times, as assigned angels to take care of this being that really needs that help. You may have done that too. Or you can Just wait for the surprise to come through of what happens as you open those places that call to you within, and you allow them to mix and merge in this way that is exemplified by this image that we're speaking of, this wise one's mirror. You can think about a friend, and then perhaps colors, perhaps blessings coming from many places, perhaps tuning into it and seeing what is required and what is being called. So this is really the idea of the multidimensionality that we're speaking of, rather than focusing on one and leaving where we are right now. Is a many-layered, an open kind of presence that we're speaking of. It really goes well with what we were speaking last time with the harmonic relationship.
So oftentimes it's said that the way that our soul, individual souls, know themselves is through what's reflected on the mirror of the soul. And our souls tend to identify with what's reflected on the mirror. And what's reflected is what we tend to identify with on our side of things, the manifest side of things. So if we're fully and only identified with our manifest being, then our soul comes to believe that that's all that it is. And if we have an experience in a subtle realm, then our soul may believe, well, that's what it is. And as Ravani Ross said, what we're wanting to do, and this is really important in the Gabrielite work, first, we need to learn how to access these different levels on which we exist that are all co-present with each other. We can call them the various different realms. We need because they're latent. Our consciousness is latent in terms of its capacity to become aware of that level of our being. But once we do that, we always want to ground it and feel the unity of our being that now becomes vaster and vaster in terms of the levels that we incorporate. And the term that came to me this week thinking about this multidimensional nature of our being is kind of like the backstage. It's always there. We can't be conscious of it all at once. We can't take it in. And at any particular time, our consciousness is focused in a different direction, we could say. It could be focused in an experience in the world with another person, with something in nature. We could be turned within and having an experience of an inner realm, of a subtle level of being, of a great master, saint, or prophet, or so on. So we have that ability to modulate our consciousness, and all of those experiences are reflected on this mirror. And on the one end, that's what our soul comes to identify with. And as we awaken, our soul realizes more and more of the true nature of what it is. But the divine being is wanting to know itself through us. And so we can imagine now that we have two mirrors together, and each one is inputting information to the other side. And to the extent that we can open up more and more of our being, more can come through in the other direction. So we want to increase our capacity. And so one way I've thought about this, another term is like the platform of our being. So I'll talk about the movie.
Okay.
So some of you might remember in the old days, you'd go to the penny arcade and they'd have a thing you could put a nickel in or whatever and turn a crank, and it just had a bunch of cards, pictures, but when you turn it, they'd move and you'd see like a little movie from the way that they were drawn.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we'd want to, too many teenagers would be interested in playing their video games that way. It's pretty low resolution. And then we had black and white TV, and then we had color TV, and then we had color movies, and you might remember Cinerama, and we had IMAX. But now we have virtual reality goggles you put on in which you feel like you are living right in the thick of the experience. And all of this technology enables us to have a more multi-level experience of what's going on. And so the experience that we have when we come to this connection that we've called harmonic relationship as Rabani Rao was saying, that I mean, through the ages, people have described their experience through metaphors, parables, and poetic images, or put it into music, and so on. And it's an attempt to translate an experience that's beyond any words, or really beyond any image that can be expressed. But it's a likeness of the experience. It's like something that what an icon does, or what a mandala does. It triggers something in you that opens you up to be able to experience a deeper connection with reality. And so that's one reason why it's very important to develop this multi-level consciousness that we're all capable of doing, but it takes work and practice. It's not, as you I'm sure discovered, it's not sufficient just to go, oh, they're telling us that we're multidimensional beings, and all these levels are in working with each other, so I'll just close my eyes and there I am. Well, it takes some development to really be able to do that.
Okay. So in the spiritual body, celestial earth, there's much discussion about the sensory world, the world of the five senses, in that it is really, we think of it as that's where we are. But that the way that it is thought of in Sufi understanding, we are really the souls, our souls themselves, who we really are, is in this barzakh, that we are, that is what we call the world of the soul. But there it is a place of imagery, imagery that really expresses all the events of our soul, the stories, the allegories of our soul. You might think of it as your dream world, like a very deep dream world that is connected with the higher realms. And all the light comes through, the devotion and reverence of the angelic planes and all the archetypes are all intermingled in this deep experience that we have, but it's based on, and it is theophanized is one word that we've been using, or the God and the soul is projected into this world of the senses. And we see different things in that realm, and for many, many years, we think that's it. And we feel separated, short-circuited, sometimes, many times through beings that have gone before us. There have been openings that have brought things from the higher realms and the higher understandings to us. Or sometimes we even come in with some understandings, somehow. Some people would say from other lives. However, usually it takes a long time to awaken, to bring different abilities and understandings to try to open the experience there. Azarbash was just speaking about what we were calling the backstage. I think you called it something else just now.
Yeah.
This idea of this place within us that could be used for, well, it's really taking a look at all these higher realms and how they are a part of us. But our backstage, for most of us, is a place where we feel the attack of how our parents have treated us through the years. We feel the nagging. We feel the I should have done this. All these voices that speak to us. We think that that's really how we are. I mean, we can kind of quiet them down a little bit, or pacify them, or go to a psychologist and get some help about what to do with all this, and don't really realize that the backstage is really meant for our to use that imaginal faculty to be able to, when we find our connection with the divine, and we find our connection with the higher realms, that really becomes more of a way station, um, becomes more of an opportunity, or I guess a treasury even, of the ways that we can work with what is before us in the world of the senses. You want to say anything
Yeah.
about that?
So at the start, I was talking about constriction, and I said that this constriction is only a limitation if we are solely identified with our manifest self. So the things Ravani Ra was talking about, if what's going on behind the scenes in your being, so to speak, is just leftovers from your conditioning, from tapes playing, from what other people have told you, or that you've come to believe in yourself, then it's pretty hard to extricate yourself from that, because you're in a limited state trying to get to a place of freedom. But just a real simple example, imagine a mouse in a lab study was put into a maze that had walls. So it's a three-dimensional maze, and there's some cheese at the end, and the mouse can smell the cheese, but no matter how it wanders around, it can never get there. The only way it can get there is to climb over one of the walls. It has to add a dimension to get to the solution. So a lot of times we get stuck in trying to find a solution or trying to find freedom, engaged in a space of limited possibilities in which the solution is hard or perhaps impossible to come by. So if we can realize ourselves as beings that do exist on all of these levels, that can free ourselves from these old patterns by coming to identify with a much vaster sense of ourself that can't possibly be bound by the stuff that kept us stuck before, then we can really start to make progress in leaps and bounds on our spiritual journey. And I'd like to add a little bit more about the idea of the mirror. And I love the idea Ravani Ra came up with, of the, thinking of it as being 3 dimensions or even more dimensions. So if you think about the, not only on our end do we identify with what's reflected on our soul, but we can say that the divine knows of him, herself, through the experiences that we reflect on to our soul. Mm-hmm. And the more opening that we've come to, the more cross connections of these different levels of our being, then breakthroughs can take place. So now imagine, some of you may recall the way Einstein described the 4th dimension. He said, well, if you could really live in the 4th dimension, then you could just look down, so to speak, and you'd see everything happening at different times, past, present, and future, just all laid out there. It would all be part of one thing. Well, the nature of our being is like that. We identify with our temporal existence at the present time, and we have memories of what happened before, and we have thoughts about what will happen the rest of this life, and maybe some thoughts about what we think might happen after this life, but we don't tend to have the backstory or the backstage of feeling that our being incorporates all these times, the past, the future, the present, and not only that, beyond time. And when we can do that, the possibilities of what can not only be reflected on the mirror, but what can come forth to bring about transformation to ourself. And that transformation is taking place throughout all the parts of ourself, through all those times and spaces and beyond times and beyond spaces. So now we have the Sufis would talk about the double reflection of the light of glory. So imagine now these 2 mirrors, the human and divine, and now what's reflected in the relationship between the two, this exchange, this circulation of light, and each side affecting the other side all at once, everywhere, then what arises from that? That is the fruit of this harmonic relationship that we've been talking about.
Very nice. So let's do a practice. So let's take a few breaths and close our eyes. So I want you to imagine an element of the world around you. And I'm going to suggest that you might be like a bird watcher that has gone out on a walk in nature, or perhaps you're just looking at nature around you, and you choose something around you that you'd like to have a better relationship with, or you'd like to honor, like to show your love for them. My friends and I choose an animal every week to honor, but you choose an animal, or maybe a tree, or even a piece of grass, something around you on this walk. And perhaps if you are walking, it'd be nice to have you just sit for a moment so you're at peace. And in your mind, you have seen this, just a glimpse of whatever this is. So look at that picture that you see of this being, of this plant, this thing. And now we're going to take this image and reflect it on the mirror of our mind, this wise person's mirror. Reflect it upon your heart, you might say, another word for it. And rather than just seeing the image, which might have been just a wing and a part of an eye, you're bringing it into meaningfulness for you. And it acquires a meaning. And going deeper, it acquires a special connection to you. It's really bringing it into the world of the soul. And so there are layers upon layers of things that are now brought to this image of the bird, or of the animal you saw, of the tree. And now an instance in your life that this reflects, that was special to you, this time that you were with this being, this animal being. You're feeling those feelings, and the light in you begins to rise as you are feeling these things. And there's a recognition of something familiar between you and this little being. And you realize that there's no reason why all of the light that there is not available to this, let's say, bird, in this instance. And that it's calling on all of the depths of being that I can identify with. It's like there's no singularity, there's no pulling away from other things like in manifestation. It just seems to be collecting itself in realm after realm, in realms of color, in realms of sound, and especially the light that is rising. It's the special light called Svarna, that light which is really light being. It's the same thing as being, but it is light. And it's almost like this place, this image is opening to all the back channels, and everything can arise in this relationship and in this moment. Let's take a few moments to allow the opening, the unlimited connection to light, that light that is everywhere and everything. And as we finish, kind of earmark certain parts of this that you might want to explore some more later. And also see it as that how this is a part of the world of your soul, story of your soul, and the way that you've related and what is unfolded for you in this experience. And also notice that we can begin anywhere. Azar has said this many times, that everything become a portal. So every relation you have can be a portal. And everything can be a way to open the light of Svarna. So let's think of thankfulness for this opportunity and this night that we have together. Take one more deep breath and open our eyes.
Okay, so now let's take a look at desire. As you may recall, I think one of the most significant things that Hazrat Inayat Khan said was that every desire begins with a divine impulse. And what happens, that divine impulse, as it comes through the different levels on which our soul exists, all the way down to our manifest self, it gets distorted, sometimes distorted 180 degrees. So you may be thinking, well, gee, some of the desires I have or have had don't seem to be very divine at all. They seem to be the opposite of that. But it could just be because that game of telephone, it's got distorted along the way. But the point I want to get across here is that you could say it's human nature that we're always wanting to satisfy our desires. A desire has a built-in implication of a need or a lack of something, or at least something that we're wanting to feel more complete or more whole. And many times people go through their whole lives just pursuing this desire, and then it's satisfied, and for a while they feel happy, and then it's like, well, something in me is not satisfied, and then it can be on an unconscious level. They look for something else to want so they can be in the pursuit of satisfying that desire, and then when that's satisfied, temporarily they feel happy, but there's no end to that process. So to me, it's like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole with desires. You get this one, and then another one pops up, and then another one pops up. Well, the way many spiritual traditions have dealt with that is to say that you should rise above desires. If it's the path of yoga, like Shiva, well, you should master your desires, and so you're going to get to a place beyond desire. You're going to merge into the infinite. And we've talked about this before, what the aim of different spiritual traditions is, oftentimes associated with a loss of any type of individual identity. It's just dissolving into the one, whatever that is called. But in Sufism, at least the kind that Hazrat Inayat Khan brought to the West, the aim is awakening in life, which is the process we're engaged in. It's to fulfill that original divine impulse, but it's not just, okay, we're not really involved in it. We want to become like a hollow shell and just have it come through unchanged. I think that's an old notion of spirituality. There's something contributed to the divine being by our experiences in life and the way that our being has transformed that light and what's returned to the divine from us. And so in this process that we've been talking about for quite some time now, using the creative imagination, the creative faculty of the soul to participate with the divine in the barzakh, in the interface, in the human divine co-creative process. It's a process of what is brought forth in the new creation that takes our input from our side to really happen. It can't happen from the divine side by itself. And it certainly can't happen from the human side by itself. So back to my example of the maze where the mouse had to climb over the wall to get out. if we're looking for the solution of satisfying desires just in our concepts of what we think reality is, which is generally limited to the physical realm that we're in, then there is no end to it. We'll never achieve that satisfaction of desire. There'll always be more. No matter how much you have, you're going to want more of this or more of that. However, if we realize that the only way that that desire can truly be satisfied is if we awaken to the full potentiality and reality of who we really are, that we are human divine beings. We are beings whose soul encompasses all of existence, which is interconnected with everything in all of existence. We are each a unique being of light, a unique expression of light that has the capacity to come into harmonic relationship with anything and everything that we are experiencing. So I was thinking earlier about fiber optic cable. So fiber optic cable can carry tremendous amounts of information, and broadband information is generally carried on this fiber optic cable. And what is it? It's light. So it's light that is carrying all of this information that we have our computers that can pull out just what's needed of it. Because if you remember the old days of the modems with the squeaky kinds of sounds, if that's the only input you got was the sound from that modem, you couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't do anything if you could see the light that comes from the fiber optic cable. It would be useless to. You have to be able to, back to Kabad, that narrowing down to pull out exactly what it is that you are seeking for. So I was thinking about how paradoxical it is that we are beings comprised of light, and the light that our being consists of is the very means by which the divine brought about creation, but it's also the means by which the divine operates in creation, receives input from creation, and it's also the means by which the uniqueness of our being expresses itself through light in relationship with other forms of light in a way that has a tangibility about it, that can establish a clear connection, a clear relationship that can bring about, finally, a way to bring about a satisfaction of this original divine impulse that continually evolves.
Beautiful. And the beings in the Sufi tradition, Pir Balayat used to say the ancient Sufis, from probably about 1,000 years ago, who brought the Zoroastrian ways of seeing things, which is all based on light, to Sufism in that century. They were called the Ishraqis. And in the, I guess, Persian dialect, Ishraq means the rising of the light. And it refers also to this, the soul, the analogy of the soul rising within us, this light of the soul rising. And it's seen as, in the allegory, as the sun rising, that when we see the sun rising, no surprise that a lot of us are very interested, and look over my head right now, of the the wonderful beauty of the sun rising and setting, realizing what the light is, all the ways that you were speaking. It was this wonderful allegory of the soul right there in light itself. I've often, maybe like some of you, I'll awake in the night with usually either an awakening, like a desire that I must meditate about something, or sometimes it's a feeling of disappointment, or I should have done this, or, some kind of I see it as like a fire, some kind of burning or ishq, right? But I've learned that this is a call to me to meditate, to go into meditation and find out what is this. So it's almost like I'm allowing it to grow, this desire to grow in me so that I can see it better. And I've also learned in these 40 years that probably that is a calling to me from the divine, and um, and that anyway, all the things that are pulling us in life, and uh, we think that they are, that I want this over here, I want this over here. Well, that's because there are those over heres in our existence, rather than everything all being that one soul, and these reflections of that one soul that inhabits all around it. We are parceled out, and it's a very difficult situation. So we see things as needing things over here and over there, or needing it before that person gets it, or after that one gets it, or you know, that in these sliced up ways of seeing things. But I'm seeing it now as a call um, to get to that place of harmony, get into meditation, or allow looking at around myself and seeing what's telling me more of the story that this aching is speaking about. Uh, I interpret it as thirst for the divine instead of just having to avoid it. And I hope that that's something that you might look at also. Um, Al-Halaj spoke about this burning, this ishq, and he said, I want burning, burning. So we want, it's not that we're trying to get rid of the desires, as you were saying. Uh, that we want the ultimate. It's okay. It's what is arising in us, this deep thirst for the divine, but we just seem to see it reflected in different kinds of ways, and we are confused about it. And I want to read something about that sounds to me like the rising of the light. Things and beings of the earth raised to incandescence allow the apparition of the angels to penetrate to the visionary intuition. And this imagination unveils the hidden reality. Its action is that of the tar wheel, to occultate the apparent, to manifest the hidden. And it is all part of that alchemical process that we are all on, that we are all adventuring in. And so I say hallelujah to all of the the ishq within us, and may we understand the mysteries that are involved in our own lives and those of our friends.
And along with that, I'd like to read a few passages from Ibn Arabi. And we've talked about Tawil ever since the first class about birthing the resurrection body. And we talked about Tawil as harmonic perception, about helping reveal the deeper reality behind the surface of what appears. So this is from Ibn Arabi. To say that one of our thoughts, sentiments, or desires is concretized in a form specific to the intermediate plane of idea images of subtle matter, aka Barzakh, is the same as to meditate before a flower, a mountain, or a constellation in order to discover not what obscure and unconscious force they manifest, but, and I love this, what divine thought flowering in the world of spirits is epiphanized, is at work in them. I'll read that last part again. Not to discover what obscure and unconscious force they manifest. In other words, not to just get to some very abstract archetypal level of being, but rather what divine thought flowering in the world of spirits is epiphanized, is at work in them. And then another similar passage, and this is similar to what Ravani Ra read, we've talked about Himma, which is the creative faculty of the heart, Himma, which uses the creative imagination to perceive the intermediate world, and by their raising sensory data to a higher level, to transmute the outward envelope into its truth. And here's the crowning part of this: so permitting things and beings to fulfill their theophonic function. And that's another way that says to enable us, by coming into this state of harmonic relationship, to enable everything that we encounter to reveal itself to us, to be Gabriel to us. And the reverse is true, to enable ourselves, by virtue of being in that state of relationship with what we are experiencing, to be our own unique Gabriel, bringing forth a revelation to whatever it is that we are experiencing. So now there's this communication in the world of the resurrection body of just lights upon light, of this
feeding process.
Yeah, this never-ending process. Theophany is the coming to life, coming to expression of the divinity that is the true nature of something. So when we talk about awakening in life, well, first of all, who is awakening? Well, ultimately, God is awakening through us being a unique expression, the finite end of divinity expressed in manifestation. We are awakening to the reality of who we are. Our divine being is awakening to the reality of itself. So that's the first part. That's awakening in life. What is that life? To start, we think, well, okay, we're in this world that's got all this junk going on, but we're going to become illuminated in this world, but we're still in this world that we're in. No, we are discovering that we always have and truly exist in a much more multidimensional world, of which this manifestation is certainly a significant part. It's kind of like the base of it, but the world that we're in is now so much more opened up and communicative and in relationship, and allowing all these cross connections of all the parts with each other, these communications, these revelations, the never-ending unveiling of divine wisdom that takes place not only from us, but from what we're experiencing, and from the light upon the light of what we're experiencing, even a wisdom that couldn't come from either side individually. It's now a product that's born from these two in connection. So I'm going to practice at some point.
Yeah, that's time.
Okay, so let's do a practice. So close your eyes. And we're going to really engage our creative imaginations. So as I guide you through this meditation, put aside any thoughts of, well, I don't know if that's really me, or I don't know if I can do that. Just assume, of course you can. Of course you can use this faculty and allow yourself to open up to an experience. So we're going to step into the backstage of our being, and allow yourselves to feel with each breath that you take, you're breathing into and from every level of manifestation on which you exist. So you're breathing in the fragrance of pure spirit and the uncreated light of the heavenly realm, and the light of wisdom and genius of the jinn realm, and the light of the archetypal realm, beyond anything that can be put into words, and the light of even what's beyond that, beyond any name or form or concept. So all of this is you. And just like it's not any kind of stretch to imagine as you breathe that you're breathing with your whole body. So now we're going to breathe with our whole soul. Easy. Your soul's with you all the time. You're just now setting an intention to feel this breath communicated and expressed through all the places that reflect upon your soul through all the realms. All these modulations of light. And as your breath continues to go through all of these parts of yourself, feel a unity of your sense of your being, a coherence of your being that's present, whether or not you're identified with any particular level on which you exist. So whether or not you're even temporarily aware or not aware of your physical self, you still have a sense of who you are. It's not a concept, it's just a deep certainty. And now, as our souls are vaster than the universe, that are interconnected with everything that exists in time and space, but also everything that exists beyond name and form, beyond time and space. So we can't quite make an image of that, and we don't need to. But yet now feel with your breath that with each breath that you are touching and are touched by your harmonized, harmonic relationship with all that exists. The perfection of that divine harmony, that unique way of relationship that only comes from your soul. It's like you're basking in this light, but also you're emanating this light so that everything else is receiving that unique light of your soul. And in this state of awareness of yourself, you can allow blessings to come from you, to go to wherever they're needed in existence on any level. Not feel like they're being broadcast from a central place, but they're emanating from everywhere to everything. It's like everything is suffused in the blessings that arise from your soul. And conversely, allow yourself to receive the blessings that the divine brings to you from all of existence. Every face of God shining on you from everywhere and every time and beyond space and beyond time. Being seen by the divine, being embraced by the divine, being loved by the divine, being blessed by the divine. allowed the realizations from this experience to be engraved in the temple of your heart. So you always can remember. And when you forget and get caught up in circumstances of external conditions, it'll only take but a few breaths of recollection of this experience to help you step into the vastness of your being. It can't be constrained by any circumstance, any limitation, but rather brings an opening, brings new possibilities, brings new life to wherever you go and whatever you do. May the blessings of God rest upon you. May God's peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore. Amen.
Mhm.